Hey there, welcome back to the channel. And today I'll be talking about the different ways and methods to remember the specific anatomy of the brainstem. Because I've been studying and I keep getting asked these lesions, the medial medullary lesion, the lateral pontine lesion, and so on and so forth. And it's just been a bit annoying. But after having put some thought into it, um, I figured out a few tips and tricks that you can use to kind of, understand the general anatomy of the situation so that, when you're given a question with a lesion, you'll be able to figure it out. So in this video, I'm just going to go over the different methods we'll use. And in the subsequent videos, I will go over specific conditions and use these tricks to kind of, help you remember them. So let's start off with the location of the facial cranial nerve, not the facial, the cranial nerve nuclei. So for the purposes of this video, because we're looking at the brainstem, as you may be aware of, and if you're not, well, cranial nerves 1 and 2, olfactory and the optic nerve, they're not located in the brainstem. They're located higher up, so in the diencephalon. So we won't really be looking at those. But let's get started with the midbrain pons and the medulla. So the midbrain is the superior most part of the brainstem, and the medulla is the inferior most. So that leaves you with the pon in the middle. So the pons in the middle. So you have 1 and 2 above it, and the good thing is that it goes in a kind of like descending order, and that really helps with like remembering them. So 1 and 2 on the top, and then you go at the midbrain and you have 3 and 4, and because you have 2 sides to it, you get a 3 and 4. Now obviously what follows after 3 and 4 is 5, 6, so on and so forth. So lower down in the pons you have 5, 6, 7, and 8, and the same on the opposite side, 7 and 8. And like you can guess, now you have 4 cranial nerves remaining, and that leaves you with the medulla. But the thing about the medulla is you have 9 and 10 and 12. 9 and 10 and 12. 11 is not quite within the medulla, but you can find it on the portion of the spinal cord outside it. So these are basically how the nuclei are sorted, and it helps to know them this way. This is how I remember them. I normally like to work my way up from the medulla, but if remembering something else helps you better, then go for it. Next, we have the nuclei. So by medial nuclei and lateral nuclei, what I mean is, if I were to kind of draw a portion of the brainstem there, you have the pons in the middle, the midbrain on top, and the medulla on the bottom. Anything that I mark in green would be medial towards the center, and anything that I mark in red would be lateral. Oh, my apologies there. Red will be lateral, so around there. Knowing where they are really helps, because if it's an artery that supplies the medial portion of the brainstem and you have a lesion there, well, the symptoms will specifically affect the nuclei that are present in that region. So there's a very, very easy way to remember the two of them. So with the medial nuclei, you'll normally find them to be the motor nuclei. Okay, motor. M for medial, M for motor. So let's keep that in mind. M for medial, M for motor. And if you can think of the different motor nuclei, well, you don't need to, because very, very easy way to remember them. 3, 4, 6, and 12. Now you might think, you've just listed out some random nerves there, but if you look closely, all of these are divisible by 12. So, well, yeah, all of them are multiples of 12, basically. So, you have 12. Now, 2 times 6 gives you 12. 3 times 4 gives you 12. 4 times 3 gives you 12. Now, you might say, but 2 and 1 are also multiples of 12. Well, forget 2 and 1 because they're not even part of the brainstem. And hence, it helps to just remember that they're all multiples of 12. So 3, 4, 6, and 12 give you the medial and the motor nuclei. So now, by the process of elimination, what you're left with are the rest of them. So if you look at the lateral ones, now if you've already covered the motor nuclei, then these will be the sensory ones. And what I like to do is to fill in the blanks after having listed out my motor nuclei. So, let's do that now. So, 1 and 2, we disregard them. 3, 4, already motor. What comes next? 5. Then you have 6 listed there. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, you might say, but these aren't exactly sensory nuclei. Well, they're somewhat mixed and there are nuances to it, but you know what? By the process of it not being motor and medial, you get these, and it's helpful to remember these in this way. So now we'll move on to the tract. So what do I mean by tracts? Well, I mean the different types of fibers running through the spinal cord or the brainstem. So, you have a tract that's involved in pain and temperature, which is the spinal thalamo tract. Then you have one which is involved in motor, which is the corticospinal tract, and so on and so forth. So an easy way to remember the medial tract is by M for medial and M for medial tract. So basically, M, very easy to remember. And because we've used the M, the 4 tracts below, the rule of 4, all begin with, well, you guessed it right, M's. So number 1, you have motor. And the motor tract is the corticospinal tract. So corticospinal tract, which is involved in all the motor functions of the body. Next, with M, you have the medial lemniscus, which basically is after the dorsal column as decussated in the medulla, and it forms fibers which are in charge of proprioception, vibration, that kind of thing. The third one is the MLF, the medial longitudinal fasciculus, which is basically involved in conjugate horizontal gaze. And I have a video on the involvement of MLF in internuclear ophthalmoplegia that you might want to check out, which might help with this if you haven't already done the MLF. And number 4 is, like we did before, the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves. And this will be multiples of 12. So you can begin with 12, go down to 6, go down to 4, go down to 3, we disregard 2 and 1. So basically, that covers all the tract locations. So any lesion in the medial portion will affect these things. So motor, medial lemniscus, MLF, and the motor nuclei. So someone presenting with these signs, well, there's that one condition, the medial medullary syndrome, which has involvement of the hypoglossal nerve, which is CN12. You have the corticospinal tract. You have involvement with the medial lemniscus as well. And all you need to know is these 4 things, and it helps, and you don't really have to learn that condition. Next, you have the tract locations for the lateral stuff. And luckily for us, there's an easy way to remember this as well. Remember the sensory I mentioned in the lateral nuclei? Well, you can link that to this, and S for sensory and S for lateral tract. Okay, so with the lateral tract, let's start with the spinal cerebellar tract, and it's in the name. It's always in the name. Spinocerebellar tract is the cerebellum, is the fibers from the cerebellum going down, and if it's from the cerebellum, it's gonna give show up as ataxia, problems with balance, orientation, all of that stuff. Next, you have the spinal trigeminal nucleus. And this basically is the trigeminal nucleus that's involved in pain and temperature sensation on the face, because trigeminal nerve that passes through as well. Number 4, you have the it's quite the big one. Well, if you guessed this one, then kudos to you. The spinothalamic tract. Now, this tract is involved in the pain and temperature from the rest of the body. So it's quite easy to remember because you have the face and the rest of the body, the pain and temperature to both of them. Obviously, the difference would be that to the face you have ipsilateral involvement, and to the rest of the body you have contralateral because it decussates. And last but not the least, you have the sympathetic pathway, which is basically what's involved in the pathogenesis of Horner syndrome. And a good thing to remember is that the two of these run next to each other. So any lesion might affect the both of them. So yeah, that's the lateral ones dealt with. And last but not the least, let's have a look at the blood supplies to each part of the brainstem. So first, I've divided them into the midbrain, pons, and medulla to help us with remembering them. So let's start with the midbrain. Now you have the midbrain that's supplied by the posterior cerebral artery. So don't get this confused with cerebellar, cerebral artery. So this supplies the cerebral hemispheres, not the cerebellum. So that's dealt with. Next you have the pons. Now if you look at it, if you're going in descending order, then the next artery that comes after the PCA in the circle of Willis and all of that, if you remember, will be the ICA, the anterior inferior cerebellar artery. And that's exactly what supplies the lateral pons, the ICA. And now for the ICA to be supplying the lateral bit, it has to have an origin point, an artery that leads up to the kind of origin of the ICA, and that artery is the basilar artery. Now, right underneath the ICA, what do you have? You have the pica, the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and right under the pons you have the medulla. So they're very intuitive. You don't even have to think about it. If you say, okay, the ICA is above the pica, well, what's about the medulla, the pons? And then the artery that supplies the medulla is the anterior spinal artery or the vertebral artery. Now, if you know your anatomy, you'll know that the vertebral artery eventually becomes the basilar artery. So that's very intuitive as well. And you know that the basilar artery will eventually give rise to the PCA as well. So, yeah, that's basically it. So we've covered the location of all the cranial nerve nuclei, we've covered the location of all the tracts, we've covered the location of all the blood supply. Now, whoa, that just looks like a whole lot of crap. In the next video, we will go over the medullary lesions, and then following on from that, we'll go over some pontine lesions. And following on, we'll do some midbrain lesions. So thank you for watching.